concatenation is a fancy word for adding strings together in the world of programming. I've created here a application called string concatenation, and I have two text boxes, one named txt first name. I'm going to pull my properties window over so you can see this a little bit better. So txt first name, another one called txt last name. Got two labels here that I did not name, just specifying what those items are. We have a button named btn login, a label called lbl output, and a text box called txt output. Let's take a look at the code for the button. So I created two string variables, fn and ln for first name, last name. Fn equals the text that is inside the text box named txt first name. Ln equals the text that's in the text box named txt last name. And then I created another variable here called full name. It's also a string variable. And I set it equal to fn, that's the value of the first name text box, plus. The plus is the concatenation operator. So it says to add to fn a literal string of space, quote, space, quote. That will add a string after the value of fn. And then I'm concatenating again with another plus sign, the value of ln. So the result is full name should equal whatever's in the first name text box and a space and what's in the last name text box. And I displayed that in the LBL output and txt output label and text box respectively. Before I display the full name and LBL output and txt output, I said I'm going to show a message box. And in that message box, I'm going to do some more concatenation. So everything that's in here is just simply my prompt. No title, just the prompt or the string. And the concatenation is a literal string of welcome, comma, and a space. And then I'm concatenating the value of full name, that's the first name, space, last name, and concatenating an exclamation mark, another literal string. So when we're concatenating, we can use literal strings, we can use string variables, we could use string constants, we could use string properties such as text. I could have said string full name equals txt first name dot text plus quote space quote plus txt last name dot text, and that would have worked just the same. I didn't necessarily need to put these into variables. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And so I have in the first name the value of Matthew, last name is Dylan. If I click the login button, I get a message box that says welcome, comma, space, Matthew, space, Dylan, exclamation mark. That's all that concatenation. I'm going to click OK, and you'll then see I get Matthew space Dylan in both of the label and the text box for my output. So that's how concatenation works, simply using the plus sign to add strings together. And don't forget that if you want a space, remember there's not a space here necessarily after the first name or before the last name, we need to concatenate that in. We also have something called escape characters. Perhaps I want the first name and the last name to appear on two separate lines. In order to be able to do that in a string, I can use an escape character, which is a backslash n. There are other escape characters that often come into play. The most common ones would be a backslash r for carriage return, kind of back to the old typewriter terminology days. A backslash t would be a horizontal tab. If you want a single quote inside a literal string, you can use a backslash quote. If you want a double quote, you can use a backslash double quote. And then if you wanted a backslash, since a backslash is a escape character, if you wanted a backslash, maybe you're doing a string of a path statement for a folder, you could do two backslashes. And then you can use Unicode characters, which is a backslash u, the 4-digit Unicode character. So if you did a backslash u00A9, that would be the copyright symbol, and a backslash u266B would give you the double quarter note. However, be aware that the characters are dependent on the font. This is in the Arial font. So in a different font, that could render a different character. Let's go ahead and use these. We'll put a \n and we'll put the quarter notes into one of our strings. So instead of the space here, when I'm concatenating the full name, I'm going to do a \n, which will give me first name and then the last name, the ln, on a separate line. And then after the exclamation mark, let's do a couple spaces, and I'll do a \U266B. That is the special character of the quarter notes. To get to the special characters for a particular font, you can use the char map or character map that comes in Windows as a utility file. And you can simply look up the font and it'll show you all the characters. You can scroll through them and you'll see the little hexadecimal value for that character, and you can then use that in a string. So let me go ahead and run this. So same difference as before, except now I'm getting a carriage return line feed for the Matthew Dylan. Matthew's on one line, Dylan's going on the next line. And then after the exclamation mark, I have a couple spaces, and we see that double quarter note. I'm going to click OK. And notice the label and the text box. They look differently. And this is one of those little gotchas in C#. So the \n works fine to create a new line character in a literal or in a string, such as in a message box, and in a label, but it doesn't work in the text box. The text box requires a carriage return and a line feed. So I'm going to fix that. I'm going to close my app, come back to my code. Instead of the \n, I'm going to do a \r\n. I'm going to run this again. And you'll see that works just as well for the message box and the label, but now it also works for the text box. So there's my message box, 2 lines. My label is 2 lines. My text box now is 2 lines. There's one other thing I can do. Instead of this \r\n literal string, is I can add a reference to the environment class and call the new line character, and that also is a carriage return and line feed. So now when I run this, we're going to see that it works the exact same way. I get the carriage return line feed and everything. So if you're going to use this a lot, here's another little tip. You can create a string variable, and I'm going to call it CRLF for carriage return line feed, and I'm simply going to set it to environment.newline. And then whenever I want to use that, I can just concatenate CRLF, carriage return line feed, and we'll see this work as well. Carriage return line feed, I get 2 lines, and you saw the 2 lines in the message box. So that's how we concatenate strings and add special characters in using escape characters. And again, you have access to tons of different characters using the Unicode character mappings. So one more thing to point out is the combined concatenation operator. And in this case, we can add something to an existing string using the plus equals operator. So say we had a variable called pres16, which was a string value, and we assigned the value of Abraham to it. I can then take the variable pres16 and use the plus equals, and after that assign space Lincoln, and that appends this value to the existing value of the variable. So now pres16 would equal Abraham space Lincoln. Do the same thing again, pres16 plus equals, and I have a phrase here of space, was the 16th US president, period. And now pres16 contains the value Abraham Lincoln was the 16th US president, period. So that's how we can append values to an existing string value, whether that string be a variable or a text property of something like a text box or a label.